Welcome to the Irish NFL show and welcome to our NFC South divisional preview. I guess if you wanted to spin it positively, you could use the euphemism of competitive to describe the NFC South. I guess it's technically the NFL's most competitive division. The teams are very evenly matched. That's another way of saying every single one of them finished with a losing record last year, and even the division-topping Bucks could only manage at 8-9 before going to the playoffs and limping out at the end of the day. We might just start with the Bucks, though, as the table toppers. That's the way we've been doing this. We've been looking at the team that finished top of the division first and assessing their prospects before we go into the other teams in the division. Brian, I'll start with you. The Bucks, on paper, still have a lot of big name players, a lot of talented players. Obviously, they don't have Tom Brady anymore, which is a big part of the picture here. How do you see this year panning out for them?
A lot of aging players, and whilst they're very competitive, we saw over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, very successful in their own right in terms of what they do on the field. We saw last year how difficult it was for Brady, and I know he's obviously on the wrong age of 40-odd in terms of playing, and it finally caught up for him last year, but you kind of got the sense teams have struggled last year, just things never clicked, and Todd Bowles, there's a lot of people who've never really kind of taken to him. He had that one good year with the Jets, and they always felt it would be a steep uphill battle again once he got an opportunity to be a head coach in the league. And I don't know whether it was the nature of taking over from such a head coach that he had, and last year where he arrived on the sideline in New Orleans, and the players seemed to get really motivated again and go out and play. They didn't seem to play in the manner last year in which we saw from previous years. I don't know whether that was a coaching thing, but the quarterback conundrum for the Bucks this year has been a strange one, because Brady retires. We didn't see enough from Baker Mayfield last year. He struggled in Cleveland, and he was released, and he went to the Panthers. We didn't see enough of the Panthers. He ends up with the Rams, and we saw a couple of bright moments, but certainly didn't think he'd be starting this year. And he's beat out Kyle Trask. And I wonder, I spoke to a Bucks fan this week, and he said, if Baker doesn't do well, he's gone. He's gone permanently out of the NFL. And if Kyle Trask gets his opportunity and he's a bust, he'll be gone out of the league. And they'll be in the sweepstakes next year for the quarterback. They're probably competitive because the division is so open. We touched on it there to start the show. It's a very open division. So can they knock off a few games? Possibly, but I don't see them in the position to win the division come January.
Colin, how do you think they'll go under Baker, though?
I don't have any faith in Baker Mayfield. I think you've seen what he can do. I mean, yeah, because of the nature of the league, because of the nature of sport, people will try and talk themselves into, you can make it happen, and they'll keep reflecting back to his college days. But that may as well have been a different sport, a different world. It's not there. He can't do it in the NFL on a regular basis. He beat up on a terrible Broncos team last Christmas, who beat up on themselves literally on the sideline, which may have cost Dalton Reisner his NFL career, because he still hasn't been picked up, despite the fact that he's not a bad player, but clearly people saw that, and it raised questions. But Baker ain't it, and the QB competition that they had reminded me of I think it was Bleacher Report. If you have a look, did a piece couple of summers ago about the worst QB training camp battles that have ever happened, and I imagine we will look back in years to come and say Baker Mayfield versus Kyle Trask. Oh, that was up there.
But Brian, I know you said that a lot of the roster is aging, but they're one of those teams where you can reel off, name after name after name, whether it's Ryan Nelson, Tristan Wirfs, Mike Evans, Antoine Winfield, Vita Vea. They've a lot of real big game players who've been there, done that, literally won the Super Bowl, done it all. It's hard in some ways not to see them being competitive, specifically in this division.
You would need them all to be healthy week in, week out, Connor, and we saw last year them picking up various different injuries, and I don't see it. I think Evans is slowing down. I thought there's a possibility he would be traded this offseason. I just don't see it. If they all stay healthy, I could put up an argument as to why they beat other teams in the division and potentially be up there, but it's not for me. You speak to most Bucks fans, and they're fairly consistent. This is a 5 or 6 win type of team this year.
Colin, let's talk Panthers. A lot of excitement there, a lot of excitement over Bryce Young. You know, when we were at the live show recently, Phoebe Schechter was telling us about the time that the Sky Sports crew had spent with Bryce, and how impressed literally everybody came away from that encounter. You know, from herself to the camera crew to everybody who'd met him. The impact that he's had in the locker room, the leadership he shows, the mix of humility and confidence, the skills he's displayed during training camp. You know, suddenly people are starting to forget about little Bryce Young and looking at a guy who has a big opportunity ahead of him and might have a better situation than some people are giving it credit for.
I certainly think with the coaching staff, he's got a really impressive coaching staff there. As Phoebe told us, and as anyone else will attest to, he is very smart, very sharp, pick up the playbook really quickly. The issue, Connor, as we sit here today, and we need to see it in a real game situation, but the concern is the O-line, which has, you know, it's funny because it ended the season in a pretty strong. They looked impressive in the back end of last season, but in camp and in preseason they have looked really shaky. Icky, who looked, came out, was one of the top picks last year and got better as the season went on. He's looked awful, really terrible. That is something that they need to clean up, because they, in order to be successful in the league, you have to have good offensive line play. It doesn't matter who you have at QB, but particularly when you have a young QB, particularly when you have a young QB who is diminutive, shall we say, you need to have O-line protection. That would be the concern. I think David Tepper, it's going to be another season where they'll take a step forward, but I think David Tepper is finding out that building a successful NFL team is a lot more difficult than being successful on the stock market.
You'd love to have had, and I know there's no use crying over spilt milk, and part of this was the price you had to pay to get Bryce Young if you were as high on him as the Panthers are. But that young quarterback would love to have DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey on his offense, because those would really be the kind of pieces you'd like to put around a rookie in his situation, which obviously they don't have anymore.
It was quite evident in the two preseason games in which he's played, which the opening game against the Jets and last week, in the time which Bryce Young played, there doesn't seem to be a stacked wide receiver room there. A few underrated guys, maybe they'll progress over the course of the season, but certainly something that is a concern. We touched on it when we spoke about that trade. Panthers fans were rejoiced because they were getting the first round pick, but they also, recognize we're losing our best wide receiver. It'd be interesting to see if they can have a wide receiver by committee type model this year and work on that, because there's no standout wide receiver in that team at the moment.
Brian, a team that does have a couple of standout wide receivers and a new quarterback to hopefully get the most out of them is the Saints, with Derek Carr at the helm. This is potentially one of the more fun stories to watch this year, I think.
Oh, I love this story. I think Derek Carr is going to have it. I'll be a bit more bust on this. I'll probably have egg on my face. It's kind of was alluded to in a different segment, a different podcast, but I think the Saints are going to be in the championship game this year. They're my selection to play the 49ers in the championship game.
What tragic way will they find to lose this one? That's the real prediction.
Well, I think they might just get beaten by
another Minneapolis miracle, or another non-call, or can they find a new way not to get to the big show?
They might find their way up to Santa Clara and just not be good enough to beat a 49ers team. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself because we obviously want our stuff to go out over the course of the coming weeks in terms of the other various different outlets and podcasts. But I'm really high on the Saints. I think Derek Carr is really got a point to prove. And I think Colin has lived on various different podcasts that he was showing the door in a very harsh manner at the end of the season. I think he's going to have a real point to prove. I'd argue you put him in the top 3 or 4 guys who really have a sense of what they want to show in their award this year. And I think we saw last year with a lot of games in which the Saints were in and they just didn't manage to get over the line. I still think defensively they've got some really strong players there. There's an argument that they're aging, but if they come together and are comprehensive and play the way we've seen in their manner, and if they get that kind of feel of, like a couple of years ago, you go into New Orleans and it was a very difficult task. You always felt that you were up against it. The fans were on top of you. I think they'll try to get that back this year. I think they'll get a stranglehold of teams at home, and I certainly think they've I've said it there. I think they've a strong enough team and offensive players there to push them over, make noise in the playoffs. So there you go. Saints for the championship game this year.
Right, I'll weigh in on the Falcons, and I've said a couple of times during the off season. Again, I think that they're going to be very entertaining. Everything rides on how Desmond Ridder slots in there. You would expect, and I think this is another one of those teams where coaching is a big bonus. You can argue, and there's people who have strong opinions either way on this, that Arthur Smith has overachieved based on what he's had at his disposal. I know that seems a bit rich when you're talking about a team that's only managed 7 wins in each of the last 2 seasons, but I can see scenarios in which less adept coaches could easily have limped to a much poorer record than that. I know they've stacked up on running backs, and they seem to be overweight in a way that you haven't seen teams do in the last 20 years or so in the past dominated league. But I think I can see them putting around Ridder an offense at a scheme that can help protect him and help him grow into the role. Obviously, they've made big plays in free agency. They had a hell of a lot of salary cap room. I think they were second only to the Bears heading into the offseason in terms of what they had available to bring in. That's helped them plug a few holes on defense. They look like they're going to be in a much more formidable situation there. And it's a very, very manageable division. I think I disagree with Brian. I can actually see the Falcons finding a way to top this one out. Now, I could be left with egg on my face if Ridder turns into Skidder and we don't get the best version of him, and he's below replacement level, to use that beloved analytics term. But I have a lot of faith in Arthur Smith. I think he's put him in there for a reason. I think he's thought clearly about what he's going to need to give him the best chance to succeed, and I'm willing to give this one a chance. I think that the Falcons can find their way to be the tallest pygmy in the NFC South and get their way to the playoffs. I don't think I'd pick them to go to the championship game in place of Brian's Saints, but we'll see how this one goes. It doesn't sound like we're going to have any consensus on the NFC South. And then, Colin, have you got a pick to top the division? Myself and Brian have both put our cards on the table here with the Falcons and the Saints, respectively. Do you see somebody else claiming the crown, or will it be one of those two?
I think the Falcons are the most intriguing team in the NFL. Because you could everything, even more so than the 49ers, because the 49ers are something of a known quantity. The Falcons aren't, and the Falcons are under Arthur Smith are probably prepared to do even crazier things than maybe Kyle Shanahan is willing to try. I think the sensible pick is the Saints, but I just don't know how much more they can wring from that roster. Olave is fantastic. He is absolutely sensational, and I think he will take a big jump this year. But I feel a bit like Fox Mulder. I want to believe in what the Falcons are doing.
Yeah, no, I'd be the same. You won't hear any Dana Scully from me on that one. I'm not a skeptic on the Falcons. I really do want to believe in them as well. So we'll see which one of us ends up right, or whether Bryce Young ends up lighting it up. Please don't let that happen with my selfish Bears hat on, because we've got their number 1 pick next year, and I don't want the Bears to have passed on yet another sensational quarterback. There we leave the NFC South. As we make our way through the 8 divisions during the off-season. We're closing in on the season opener very quickly here now, and we're wrapping up all the divisions, taking deep dives on them. That's where we leave the NFC South for now, though.